Just a few things. So there's obviously been a lot of interest recently in the press and elsewhere in the equity and the race equity challenges that confront higher education as they confront all aspects of our society. But, and that's great. We welcome the help. These are hard problems, and, solving them requires really all hands. But these problems are not new. They're not new to me. They're not new to my colleagues, our students, our faculty, and our staff. And we've been working against them for years. And it is important, at least to me, that we take a moment and acknowledge that work and their efforts, and we support folks in that work. And so at the risk of embarrassing just a few people, and I'll be brief. So President Carter at Shippensburg, I think has shown 4 years improvement in the persistence of underrepresented minority students, making a significant dent in the equity gap that exists there. President Driscoll and the IUP community has mounted a free speech project, tackling some of the thorniest free speech issues that we can get entangled in. It deserves national attention for the quality of the work and its impact. President Fiorentino, the progress that Westchester University has made diversifying its faculty from 14% to 26% in the last decade. President Long at East Stroudsburg University has increased enrollments of underrepresented minority students from 24 to 44% and made substantial progress ensuring ESU is welcoming and inclusive for all its students. And President Walton, who presides over the nation's oldest historically Black university, increased enrollments by 50% in the last couple of years, doubled the first to second year persistence rates. Obviously some setback there with COVID. Has seen a 60-something% increase in 6-year graduation rates, and in his spare time with his community has saved the university's accreditation and made tangible progress against persistent financial challenges. So I'm not going to go through all 14 universities, but I could, because there's that much work going on across our system. And yes, we have a lot more to do, but also we are on it, and we have been for some years. None of the trends that I just identified happened overnight. They didn't result from neglect or indifference. On the contrary, they result from dedicated, comprehensive, aligned, and purposeful efforts of all of us, students, faculty, and staff. This kind of movement requires active engagement of everyone, working together against the hardest problems that higher education faces. And because we don't live in a culture of acknowledgement, sadly, in my view, I want to just take this opportunity for all the folks who've pushed all that movement. Really hard effort. Thank you so much for everything you do. With that, I turn it back. And thank you.
Okay. Denise, Jan, please go ahead.
Sure. Jan, did you want to say something before I kick off the presentation that I have prepared?
No, Denise, I think you have enough to say. And
Okay.
I think we should hear from you, and I will certainly be here to entertain any questions or perhaps add something after if there's anything I think of. But please go ahead.
Awesome. So my updates are going to be divided into 2 sections. The first section will present updates on the Board of Governors DEI Commission. As you probably recall, it was established at the October 2020 Board of Governors meeting by Chairwoman Shapira. The second section will provide you some updates on the work out of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, where I have the privilege of serving as its first Vice Chancellor. Next slide, Randy. I want to start by reminding everyone that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we are talking about 3 different but interrelated terms. Quite simply stated, when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about the differences amongst us, such as our race, ethnicity, gender, religion. But when we start talking about equity, we're talking about fair treatment, which is not always equal. And then finally, very simply stated, when we talk about inclusion, we're talking about those actions that foster feelings of being valued and respected. It's important for me to remind folks of the differences between these terms, but also the connectedness of it, because we can put forth all the effort we want to diversify our students, our faculty, and our employee rosters. But if they are met in environments that are inequitable or are not inclusive, we're going to find ourselves wasting valuable resources, and that's just not going to get us where we need to go from a system redesign and a sustainability perspective. Next slide, Randy. Okay. So what you see here is a breakdown of the 6 components of the commission charge. One of the first things that we did in preparation for preparing a board statement affirming the role of diversity, equity, and inclusion was we surveyed the entire board to get some baseline data to get a better understanding of their readiness to engage in this work, to build this framework that we were charged to do. And one of the things that first of all, we got 100% response rate, and that was great. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to complete the survey. But what we found very clearly was that there was a sense of urgency concerning the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in system-level governments. And board members also acknowledged the importance of DEI for PASHE University's future success and sustainability. We were able to draft a statement of affirmation and commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the plan is to bring that forth during the April Board of Governors meeting. Next slide, Randy. So what I'm going to talk to you about now is some of the work that's coming specifically. Actually, Randy, would you go back to the previous slide? I'm sorry about that. The second charge was to look at board policies from an equity lens. And what we found, what we did was, we established a subcommittee to work on this particular charge. And what we noticed right away is that PASHE does not have a policy or standard process to develop, monitor, or revise board policies to ensure that they do not adversely impact students, faculty, or staff, particularly from historically excluded groups or underrepresented minorities. We've begun the work to develop a policy for policy development and review with a DEI lens to ensure that we're creating an equitable state system. We've also surveyed other systems for best practices, and we will draft a recommendation to the full commission next month or before. The third charge was regarding DEI metrics, and the Board of DEI Commission has reviewed the current DEI dashboard metrics. We've begun to explore the system DEI goals and outcomes. We've clarified and confirmed that DEI should be reflected in each of the 3 system priorities: student success, leveraging university strengths, and governance and leadership structures. And we are committed, obviously, to ensuring communications and reporting are simple and transparent. The fourth charge refers to identifying potential resources. I love this one because for me, it means funding for all of the great things that we want to do. And we are having, I think, fruitful conversations with the PASHE Foundation. And I am confident that we will be able to find, I'm confident, I'm prayerful, and maybe a few other things, that we'll be able to get the funding that we need to support this work, because it is tied to system redesign and system sustainability. The fourth charge around the BOG structure for DEI, that's yet to be determined, and I'm sure that Chancellor Chairperson Shapira and Chancellor Greenstein have some ideas about this, and they'll be bringing it forth in the future. And Lastly, with regard to the DEI advisory group, I am thrilled that we have now a board of governors, a DEI board of advisors working out of my office. We launched just last month, and I look forward to working with the DEI board of governors commission to support and advance this work. Now, Randy, I'm ready for the next slide. So this is the second and last part of my presentation, which is going to just give you a quick overview of what's happened out of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And it starts with a system-wide focus. And I believe that we are well on our way towards building a solid operating capability, starting with, as Chairwoman Shapiro said, leadership from the top. We have a Board of Governors DEI Commission. We have an Office of DEI led by a Vice Chancellor with dedicated staff and budget. We have, I believe, effective communication channels that will continue to improve. And we have execution capabilities with university chief diversity officers, advisory structures, and critical feedback loops with key university, system, and statewide constituencies. The other thing that we've done, we've created an accountability framework. There are DEI goals that are part of the system's accountability framework and factor into budget allocation decisions and chancellor and president's performance evaluations. My colleague Kate Akers talked earlier about the public dashboard with data related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we will continue to build out that transparent system of reporting and accountability. So we're really thrilled about that. Next slide. So here are some recent actions that I want to share with you. We've recently mandated diversity training for all students and employees. My colleagues in the Office of the Chancellor have already started the training, and university HR officers are working with their teams to implement it at the employee level. And chief diversity officers are leading efforts on their campus to implement these trainings for students. So we have made some, I believe, tremendous progress in that area. Another thing that we've done, we've established a system-wide structure for reporting incidents of bias and discrimination. And we're collaborating with chief diversity officers and other leaders to develop a universal reporting structure and a community response team training mechanism to promote safe and inclusive environments on all campus communities. I mentioned a moment ago that I've assembled a DEI board of advisors. We convened our first meeting last month. We're in the process of developing an outcomes-oriented 5-year strategic plan, which I will present hopefully in its full form at the April 20th board meeting. We published the first edition of Connectivity, the bulletin of PASHE's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And if you haven't seen it, you can find it on the DEI website. And then lastly, we have hired a director for diversity, equity, inclusion in Corinne Gibson. She comes from Slippery Rock University, and we're just so excited to have her. But I just, to be a little lighthearted, I want to let everybody know that I did get a friendly "do not steal any more of my people" call from President Berry after Corinne accepted the position. And President Berry, I promise you, I will work really, really hard to never do that again. Next slide and final slide. So despite the progress that we've made so far, we know that there's a lot more that we need to do. And here are a few things that are currently underway to various degrees of completion. We're in the process of examining what would a system-wide climate survey look like. We will be planning a state system diversity summit for sometime in the spring. We're going to do an inventory to build off of what Dan said earlier about all the great things that are happening around the system. We'll build an inventory of system-wide capacity building best practices so that the system office can support our campuses to the best of our ability. We're looking at establishing, in collaboration with chief academic officers and faculty, a community of practice that focuses on diversifying the curriculum. As you may recall from previous presentations I've done, this is something that students are expressing concern over, which is the lack of diversity in the curriculum. And I want to work with campuses to build off of some of the great work that is surely already underway to see how the system can support them in that area. And then lastly, strategic planning and implementation. The planning process is underway. However, the implementation phase is yet to be completed.